Good morning and welcome to a webcast on home working, sponsored by Highlands and Islands Enterprise. I'm Ian Forsyth, and with me today you'll see three people who you'll be hearing a lot more from over the next 45 minutes. We've got Donnie Morrison, who's a Senior Development Manager with Highlands and Islands Enterprise. We've got Gillian Bell, who is essentially, we'll come to what you've done in the past, but just now you provide advice and consultancy for people around home working. Yeah. And finally, we've got Kathleen Lowes, who works for Vertex in Dingwall and has had a lot of experience of setting up home working for Vertex over the last couple of years. Yeah. So we'll be hearing quite a lot from the panel over the next 45 minutes. But before I go any further, the one thing I would like to say to you is I believe that many of you have already started submitting some questions. For those of you who haven't, you'll find, I think if I've got this the right way around, just over my left shoulder, a little chat box. You type your question in there, hit the enter button, and your question will come through into the chat window. So please don't be shy. If there are things that you want to ask, if you want to take advantage of the vast knowledge that we have with the panel here today in relation to home working, this is your chance to put those questions in. So we really do want to hear from you. This becomes much better when it's interactive and you get your questions answered. So we look forward to hearing those questions coming in. I think we did a brief introduction there. I think what we should do perhaps is come to you, Donnie, first of all. You work for Highlands and Islands Enterprise. You're based in the Western Isles, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Home working, you've had some experience of in the past, but High have started to place a lot more prominence on home working now as a key initiative. Why is that?
Well, there's the economic benefit. High's main role really is to create jobs, and this opens up opportunities in rural areas where there are sometimes no office opportunities. There's so many reasons why this is a good thing for the Highlands and Islands area. It opens up opportunities for what is typically a very highly educated potential workforce, and across all the age groups as well. So it makes sense in every sense for employers and for home workers or employees. Everyone benefits, so it's a win-win situation, and it's only right that HIE should be supporting it throughout the area.
And I think you mentioned when we were talking earlier that you've had some experience of getting involved with businesses that are already using home working. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I've been involved with home working since 1994 in the Western Isles, and we've attracted contracts from all over the world in that time. We've had long-term contracts, some contracts that have been running since 1994, some home workers working in the same job all of these years, 18 years. So questions of sustainability and whether it lasts have been well and truly answered. And you know, the experience, the productivity gains, and all of the things that you hear about, you know, we've first-hand experience of it. It's ideal for our area, and now we're taking this across the whole of the HIE area and basically capitalising on what we've learned to date in the islands.
I mean, the one thing that comes out loud and clear from that is this isn't some newfangled fad. It's been around for a long time. It's been tried and tested, and it works.
It works very well, but there are new technology things happening now that make it even better. You know, all of the work that we did in the early years in the islands was very much data related. You know, basically email and typically high added value services where people are using their brain to add something to a product or service that they're working with. So what's happened now is that technology in contact centres has moved forward to such an extent that you can't tell whether somebody's working from home or not. A call goes through to a contact centre, and where that is answered really doesn't matter anymore. Even to the extent of, you know, people working from home have the same kind of support as if they were in the centre in terms of team leader support or whatever it is that they need. Technology now allows all of these things to happen from your home. So the bottom line is that previously it was mainly data related, now it can be data and telephone, and that's just opened up a huge opportunity for for the Highlands and Islands area, where there's already been, as you'll hear, a number of contact centres working successfully for many, many years.
Okay, that's great. We'll come back to Hi's role and specifically some of the things that they're doing. But Gillian, can you maybe tell us a little bit, just briefly, about your own experience, just so the audience can get a feel for your involvement in home working?
I've not been involved with home working quite as long as Donnie, which I quickly worked out is, 18 years?
Yeah.
Thankfully I got that right. So I was first involved in home working in 2007, and that was with Hilton Reservations and Customer Care. We had a real challenge with recruiting language speakers throughout the Central Belt in Scotland. So we decided to go down this newfangled, as we thought it was at that stage, route, and reach out to get people, rather than them come into a centre within Glasgow, that we could actually sort of take them out into Mohammed and get people working from their homes, taking calls and using the language skills that they did. And I just loved that model so much. All the productivity gains, as you said, and you'll hear this as well from Kathleen, and just the customer experience went through the roof, and that was the biggest thing for me at that point, that it was the customer experience, and it was that was improved because it was the calibre of the person that you were getting, who would not normally sort of come through a contact centre door, so to speak, was suddenly able to sort of work, in their own homes. So I loved that model so much that took all the learnings that I had from Hilton and sort of set up on my own for a few years, working with some other companies that are interested in home working and sort of helping them sort of make cut a few sort of learning stages. Actually have now just agreed to work for SongSafe, which is a home working solutions company, who, and if I could maybe do a little sort of advert here, are actually recruiting and who are looking at anyone within Scotland really, and the UK. And it's a contract with a huge insurer, so it just shows you that more and more companies are coming into home working, and there's huge opportunities out there, and all the training and the work can all be done from home.
Great.
So if there's anyone out there that's interested,
Plug
please let us
away,
know.
but
Plug straight away. I thought I'd get it in straight
but
away.
I think a good plug. Usually on chat shows, people are trying to flog books and
Yeah,
stuff like that.
I'm trying to bring
jobs
employment
sounds
to the
really good.
region. Yeah.
Excellent. Kathleen, you work for Vertex in Dingwall. You've got a fair bit of experience of home working as well.
Yes, over the last kind of 2.5, 3 years, we've been growing our public sector business quite significantly. Do a fantastic job from the Highlands already in Dingwall, so I wanted to set up a project to illustrate that we could grow and manage those growth opportunities in the Highlands quite quickly by testing the market, being able to tap into a market that we would never have tapped into before.
Yeah.
So we set up the project about 2.5 years ago, setting up one whole team, recruiting them from brand new, not relocating staff at home. And we felt that the advantages for the staff has been fantastic. The people that we recruited in the initial trial would not have got into the labour market due to various disadvantages, with it being either public transport, caring responsibilities, disabilities. And they've driven fantastic results for us and for our client, Westminster City Council. So we hopefully, if our growth pipeline comes to fruition, we would hope to have significant jobs over the next 12, 24 months located in the Highlands of Scotland.
Okay, so even more jobs potentially.
Absolutely, watch the space.
And I hope the Highlands as well.
Yes, absolutely, definitely. But location, as we said before, is no barrier.
No.
It doesn't even have to be just the Highlands.
Yeah.
It could be anywhere in Scotland.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're already seeing some opportunities opening up just in the 5 minutes that we've been online, which has got to be good news. Want to just take you to one of Hi's clients who we were working with recently and talking to. We filmed a couple of interviews with people because there's an interesting story behind this. It was essentially a member of staff whose personal circumstances made it very, very difficult for them to carry on in their job. They wanted to keep working where they were working, but at a personal level it just wasn't possible. And on the other side of the coin, the employer was very keen to hold on to that member of staff. So this little clip is just some background from Signpost in Inverness. It will let you hear straight from the horse's mouth. Literally, I hope Yvonne doesn't mind me referring to her as the horse's mouth. But this is someone who actually works for a company now and has moved over to home working as an option.
Well, home working, depending on the size of the organisation, has got many facets to it. So a smaller organisation may be looking at it to retain staff, to reduce costs, office space being at a premium as it is at the moment. It gives, from a business perspective, the company huge opportunities to reach out to people who they maybe would never get through their doors. People who've got huge experience and life skills who can bring a lot to their company, but location, limitations of transport, where they couldn't do that, so they wouldn't come and work for you. It opens up a huge population of people. From the employee side, it gives a lot of work-life balance, whether it's childcare, caring for somebody else, or just, I don't want to drive 30 miles to work.
And I'm coming to Inverness 4 days a week, and I find that quite a strain on my home life, rushing home for the kids. So we thought home working would be ideal.
For a company, especially a large company, they have to think long and hard about their attitude and how they change their normal planning function for work types. Normally, you know, if you take a call centre environment where they will put people in for their 8 hours or their 4 hours, whatever their shift is, for the planning they have to think differently to work out how they're going to make best use of this flexible working resource they have.
Well, the main thing was to think about, was it feasible or not? So I just really divided it up into work that I needed to speak to people. So my interviewing, for instance, has to be done in the office. And then we looked at work where purely I was using the telephone or the computer. And basically, most of my work, out with interviewing somebody, is just done by emailing or on the telephone.
One downfall is people can feel isolated.
The biggest challenge is making sure that the IT is in place, because so much of my work is done with emailing and the software programs that we have in the database, and having access to that and making sure that I can have access to that from home. And I think the other big thing is also being able to contact other members of staff.
They're sitting at home, they can't turn around to their pal, they can't go and have a cup of coffee with their pal. So through Skype or the other options that are there, they can text message to each other, and maybe they've got a problem which they haven't come across before. They can drop a wee line to their team manager using these tools, MS Communicator, Skype, to say, I'm stuck with this, I don't know, can you come on?
When we looked at the basics at it, we realised that it's not as difficult or as maybe mountainous as it seems initially.
Okay, so we heard from Yvonne and Cathy there about some of the experiences within Signpost and some general issues around home working for employees. You know, touching on stuff like more options for employment, better work-life balance, reduced travel time and flexible working hours. Those are some of the things that I'm sure during our discussion in the next half hour or so we'll go into in a lot more detail. But from your point of view, Gillian, one of the things that I mentioned there was the wider choice of employment options for people and a better work-life balance. In your experience, does that stack up with what happened at Hilton, for example, and other clients?
Yeah, definitely. Are you talking about a wider experience from the...
In terms of the people they were
able to recruit? Yeah, we were able to, I suppose it was go to the sort of the... people are just not able to get into an office, so to speak, or just the sort of types of people with a different background who had perhaps just wanted to take like a life choice, just to go down the sort of work-life balance route. And really what you find is in a sort of normal, if there is such a thing, because contact centre, the average age is about 23, and what we certainly found was that the average age of the home workers goes up to about 38, so it's definitely, you know, you're reaching a sort of more mature market or type of person, and with that, you know, bring life experience and just everything that really sort of helps that whole customer experience, because you can certainly engage more with the customers as well. Also, the big difference that we found was that in a sort of normal contact centre, if I can go do that, it's usually people have maybe just have left school or just sort of no sort of tertiary education, and normally from the home working side of things, what we found was that the is normally sort of like degrees or just loads of lots of qualifications, managerial experience. Just the calibre was amazing, and it was just the whole attraction to be able to be in your own environment, to be flexible, and I suppose and to a lot of extent it's like your own boss, although you're working for an employer, you're very much, you know, sort of in charge of what you're doing. So we certainly found it was a huge shift, and that helped that whole sort of customer experience piece, and certainly the employees loved it as well.
So advantages on both sides for employees and for employers in terms of opening up wider opportunities on both sides.
Yeah, definitely.
Can I move to you, Kathleen? I mean, one of the things from you know, someone thinking about a home-based job as an employee as opposed to an employer, in your experience, what are the things that people need to think about?
I think they need to be quite comfortable to work on their own.
Mm-hmm.
You know, some people that we've spoken to when we initially started to recruit for the project, a few people deemed that they might find it a bit isolated.
Yeah.
You know, it's certainly not for everyone.
Yeah.
But for those that, you know, have gone in and been very successful in their home working model, you know, and as Donnie mentioned, technology in terms of communicating with those members of staff is just like communicating with a team on site.
Right.
So, so great benefits for the agent. Do you want to maybe go through the question again there?
It was really just thinking about, you know, from the perspective of someone thinking about a home-based job for them, maybe the first time they've ever done it.
Yes.
What things do they need to consider? You know, so is it personal issues? Is it where they're located, or is location not important? I mean, what your experience?
Well, I think locations is definitely not important. I think the driver for the employees, with our initial group of recruits, we had people that certainly were disadvantaged and wouldn't get into the labour market because of either health, disability issues, childcare responsibilities, or other caring responsibilities. So we were able to bring them into a work environment and a kind of interactive team environment, but still being at home to care for, you know, any dependents, or they were closer to childminding facilities, and the reduced commute to work plays a huge factor for us here in the Highlands with kind of public transport links and obviously the current economic situation. So certainly, you know, drives a lot of kind of commercial benefits for the employees themselves.
Right, huge cost savings in terms
absolutely.
of things like travel and time as well.
Definitely, and as Gillian had mentioned, the work-life balance. So we found that our home workers were certainly kind of more motivated and less stressed by working in a very big environment, more likely to make sure that they had that balance correctly. So they started on time, they had the proper breaks, they enjoyed their lunch, albeit maybe hanging out their washing, but they actually had a nice break from work to resume the rest of their shift. So yes.
Right. Okay. I noticed that we've got a few questions starting to come in from the audience, which is great. Keep them coming. The first one there from Hilary about experience or knowledge of people who have tried home working. I think probably in the run-up to now we've covered that, but Hilary, if we haven't, send your question in again, maybe reword it slightly if we've missed the point, and we'll come back to you. But let's take one from David. He's asking, what is needed to work from home in computer, phone connection and type of internet connection? Now I'd probably start that off by saying probably depends on the type of job, but maybe from your point of view, Donnie, because you're kind of cross-sector, what's your experience there?
Well, this is another area that's moved on very significantly. You know, originally you would tend to have had a dedicated computer specifically for that client, and you'd need a reasonable broadband connection, of course, and with a telephone system. Again, some companies want a dedicated telephone line. But now there's technology available at even taking your existing home computer and provided it's reasonably modern, or it's certainly not running too slow and all these other kind of things you get with home computers. You actually get a dongle that just plugs in to the computer, and for the time that that dongle is plugged in and you're working for the client base, absolutely nothing on your own computer is accessible, and it's a two-way security thing in a sense. You know, it gives total security to the transaction that's going on. It's not seen in any other way other than electronically on the system. So again, you don't need a super fast broadband. I think that's the other concern. You know, people say, well, I've only got this kind of speed. You need a reasonable speed. In my experience, ideally you want a 1 or 2 megabit connection that is performing properly.
Yeah.
You don't need a 10 meg connection, you know, and certainly, you know, we've got a lot of experience of this. We've quite often in some areas you've worked with maybe the lowest technology solutions, so that you never really had any big issues that couldn't be resolved if somebody was working from home.
Right.
So simplicity of the solution can be quite important. In the past, clients used to get worried about where somebody in a rural area was going to get technical support. But even that kind of thing now, where a technical person can log onto the computer and do whatever is required, all of these things are now just business as usual. You know, they're not issues that one should get concerned about.
Right.
So, you know, the technology is there to do this. In fact, it makes it happen so much easier. So I hope that answers that question.
So in reality, there aren't huge technological barriers. It's not about having super fast broadband and those in that. You know, you both nodded while Donnie was saying.
Definitely. I think there's a lot of
too.
perceived barriers to all these things, and these have all just become, as you said, that still business as usual and non-issues now.
Can I just ask, and this is more just as a kind of general gut feel, do you tend to find, when you said, you know, using your own computer for home, does that tend to be the way it works? Do employers provide that equipment by and large, or do people provide their own, or mix of both?
I think it depends on the employer really, and the service that they're going to put from home. For Westminster City Council, obviously, like every organisation, data security is of real prime importance. So we chose to actually provide dedicated equipment for our home workers, including the kind of broadband line, so it was solely for business use. So I guess it just depends on the client. I'm aware of other projects that are up and running in the Highlands that you can use your own equipment. So there's various different models in terms of IT and contractual models.
So it comes down to no huge barriers and what's right for the employer.
Actually, most of the clients that I've certainly worked with, it's all been the employee's own equipment, because you just put in a dongle. Obviously, as you were saying, it's specifications around, you know, a few things, but it's really basic stuff, and that most people have the equipment at home.
I think the one thing is that quite often in our experience is that an additional telephone line is very, very useful, and the way security is achieved with these things is that IP address of your computer and your telephone line are matched to each other, and that provides absolute security, just the same as if you were in the office. That's the reality.
Okay, well, let's move on from technology, because while it's important, I think it is one of these things that's very much down to the individual circumstances. We've got an interesting question here from Kay, who's saying that she'd like to know if there is anything on the management system, performance management and scheduling. Any advice on these issues, please? So, management systems, performance management and scheduling. How do you guys deal with that kind of stuff?
This is
Well, certainly from scheduling, some of the organisations that I'm aware of, they typically have you book your hours 2 weeks in advance. And it depends on the circumstances for the particular contract.
Mm-hmm.
But this is what I'm about to say to you is not an unusual situation where you book the hours that you're going to work so
Yeah.
that your employer knows that you're going to be available for these hours, typically 2 weeks in advance, and then you log on, of course, at these times.
Mm-hmm.
And there's typically flexibility that if something happens, it means you cannot make it at that time. There's flexibility for you to go back to the employer and say, I'm not available these times. And I think the issue would be that if you're doing that very regularly and letting your employer down in that sense, there's a credibility issue.
Sure.
But that really doesn't happen very much at all.
So the reality is it's almost the same as an employee who comes into work every day. It's, if you're booking holidays in advance,
Yes.
it's just a
Definitely.
mirror
It
of
is,
that.
yeah. But I should say that there are a number of different contractual relationships
Right.
as well, so the model that I've given you there is typically the self-employed contractor relationship
Yeah.
where you're booking the hours that you're going to work. And I think maybe in Kathleen's case, the hours situation would be quite different where it's a more
Yes.
Is it fair to say
You're
the
an
system with
employee.
you works
Yes.
far more like that?
I guess we're kind of quite benefit of having quite a large contract and a number of channels to that contract, but we pretty much schedule the home workers as we would the resources on site,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
albeit some of our home workers have a more flexible contract,
Mhm.
doing more kind of back office type work, so provided they commit to certain hours throughout the week to
Yeah.
ensure that we hit our contractual SLAs with our client, we can give them some additional flexibility within those hours of work.
Right.
But we do have a lot of home workers that pretty much come in and that they're responsive to our peak periods and are scheduled in like our staff are on a site location.
Right. So there's broad parallels
Yes,
there.
definitely.
I mean, the bit there that Kay also asked about performance management, for me, I suppose there's almost an element of the out of sight, out of mind, isn't there? Does that mean there has to be more trust in a home working relationship than a normal relationship?
Yeah, I think that's fundamentally a kind of old perceived element of having to see your staff members. We manage our staff at home as we do our staff on site, so
Right.
we have a normal appraisal process which happens the same. We monitor the quality of work remotely as we would. We develop and coach our staff remotely through webinar sessions, via conference calls, etc. So there's nothing you can't manage with a home working resource that you can't with an on-site resource.
I think it's important to highlight that productivity typically from home workers is much higher.
Right.
There's not the same distractions, I suppose,
Yeah.
it's around the coffee machine or whatever in the office. And all the statistics show very significant in some cases. I know that in one I was involved with were the legal secretaries working remotely for law firms in London and Manchester. The productivity gain was near 30%.
Right.
And the productivity gain was the big thing,
Right.
really. And they were typically turning the work around quicker than
Mhm.
people in the office, which was really quite interesting. And it's really made it very, very successful, to the extent that sometimes even you had a lawyer in a law firm in London having his dedicated person as a teleworker or a home worker in the islands or wherever, and it just worked very, very well.
Right. So people actually do more. So the out of sight, out of mind thing, as you say, it's
But
an
I think,
old-fashioned view.
absolutely.
I think companies though that are getting so much more used to home working and home workers, and you recognise very quickly that you do have like a different type of person
Mhm.
who is wanting to work from home. So if the company is managing the model correctly, then you'll manage slightly differently the home workers, because
Right.
you don't actually needs. I'm quite sure everyone that's listening will hopefully, get this. You probably don't need quite as much management. You usually find people are committed. You'll go through the right processes when we're recruiting people. So the performance management part of it, if you're doing it properly, it really sort of sorts itself out to an extent.
Right.
And as Kathleen said, is managed very much like it is in-house, but with that sort of the whole sort of home working and realising you've got a different type of person.
Right. Sounds very much like you start to focus on the outcomes rather than whether or not someone's sitting at their desk.
Exactly.
Yes, absolutely,
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
And I think we've seen, as Donnie had mentioned, significant productivity gains from our home workers, mainly down to less distractions that they would be, fronted with in a large office environment.
Right.
So significant productivity benefits from the home workers. So
Well, that is an interesting and really encouraging thing, I think. Kay also asked a question, and I think there will be a question in people's minds about this. Health and safety is obviously something that's significant for any employer and for employees. How does that differ when it's a home working scenario? How do we deal with that issue?
I think that the health and safety, for me, falls into the same sort of bracket as people that have this sort of perceptions that there's security issues and systems issues. Again, it's the whole health and safety side of things, and we were sort of chatting about this earlier and agreed that you can sort of make a meal of the health and safety if you really want to. However, the health and safety is such a known issue, but obviously you want to make sure that people have got the proper seat and desk and a proper environment to work in. But there's no need to have sort of house visits, and to make sure there's ways that you can do that. You can do things like that by webcam.
Yes,
you just get a feel of the person. You go through the right sort of where you're going through the recruitment stage with people. So the whole health and safety side of things actually becomes an issue.
Yes, definitely.
It would be interesting, from your point of view, Kathleen. Obviously, Vertex must have considered that.
yes, definitely. At the offset of our project, we actually audited the members' premises to ensure suitability for home working, to make sure there was no noise distractions, etc. And they had allocated enough room to work. But since we've developed that, we actually can do that remotely by looking at room plans, etc. And we assess. I think we probably, with initial induction, we paid a bit more attention. We spent a bit more time on health and safety when we were inducting our home workers, because we obviously can't see them. So we put a bit more emphasis on health and safety and the importance of taking breaks, sitting correctly. Again, like performance management, we manage like we do staff on site. So we do regular health and safety audits and questionnaires that go out to all our home workers. We do a kind of DSE assessment to make sure that they are sitting correctly, and that's just a regular programme of events that happen. So we keep on top of it remotely.
And you found that that's
absolutely
used to work a non-issue.
Yes,
It's been a non-issue for you.
Yes.
Okay, that's good. Very specific question here from David. May or may not have a short answer, we'll see. Do you need 2 phone lines to do homework? And I think it was mentioned the 2 phone lines earlier. Is that an absolute necessity?
It depends on the contract.
Right.
Basically, if you're, if there's calls coming in to your line when you need to be working, then typically you ought to have a second line.
Right.
So it really comes down to individual contracts. But I know quite a number of the companies that I've been involved with in the past. They've ended up, suggesting a second line, which is not such a big deal now because of the deals you can actually get. You can get a second line free or for very little, so
Sure.
it's not the kind of issue that...
Another non-issue.
Another non-issue. So it's coming across that a lot of things that people see as maybe potential barriers in reality.
Exactly.
Yes.
It's all perceived barriers.
Perceived barriers.
And I think if you get the recruitment process right from an employer and as an employee, if you make sure that home working is for you, then that it works.
Yeah.
I'd like to go back to something Kathleen mentioned, because we have had experience of this over the years in the islands, and this was the question of social isolation, this thing that comes up. We actually did a study on this quite a long time ago now, when there weren't any tools like there are now available, like chat and Skype and all of the other things. And I think it's important to recognise that some people were socially isolated before they got their home working job. And that was,
Yeah,
that was a
yeah.
predominant thing that we found in the islands then.
Yeah.
People actually said to us, I was socially isolated before I got the job. Now I've got a network of people I'm talking to, and I'm no longer
Less
socially
isolation,
isolated.
yes.
Right.
So it's important to get the balance of that right. You know, it's always a question that comes up with home working. What about social isolation? I think it's more of an issue if you moved from a busy office to work from home.
Sure.
If you're at home already and not working from a busy office, then it's a very different picture. You know, you're engaged in something that is taking your mind away from maybe what, you know, maybe you didn't have any work before and it was much more of a challenge to you.
Right.
Now you've got people you can talk to.
Right. So it can actually flip over and work better.
Absolutely. So it's quite important to recognise that, I think.
Great.
I think people are obviously communicating more remotely anyway through
Yeah.
all
now.
your
Oh, yeah.
social networking
Yes,
sites.
yes.
So,
Oh, yes.
so we've got quite a robust home working portal and web tool where the home workers can chat
Mhm.
to each other freely throughout the
Yes.
day. So they're not
Yes.
restricted to be tied down to
Yeah.
get on with their work really.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the support structure at the back of that, as Donnie mentioned too earlier, the access to team managers or training
Mhm.
is there all on the computers in terms of e-learning, distance learning
Yes.
or coaching
Yeah.
directly with a site location.
Yes. Well, certainly one contract I'm aware of, you know, that the home worker can actually signal that it needs support with a particular call that's coming in.
Uh-huh.
In the same way that if they were in a contact centre, they put their hand up, their team leader would maybe come over or take over or listen into the call. Absolutely the same
Yeah.
technology available now working from home.
Mhm.
You can signal and somebody can listen, and even somebody can whisper into your ear
Right.
without the other caller hearing.
Uh-huh.
They can give you advice while you're on that call. So
Right.
it's incredible what can
So
be achieved.
technology is making it a lot easier, and the whole social networking
Yes.
thing, and people being
Yeah.
used to that makes
Yeah.
this feel
Yeah.
almost like second nature
Yeah.
now for
Yeah.
many.
I think the whole training area as well is an interesting one. You know,
Mhm.
there's been huge developments in training. You know, a number of companies now involved in this are actually training people online. You know,
Yeah.
they
Right.
have classes. They're doing it totally virtually, so that you don't
Yeah.
really have to leave your home
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
and go for training now. It's different for, you know, some employers, you know, want people that are close to them and they want to bring them into a centre and train
Yeah.
them. But I think that even that will go eventually, and you know, some of the companies are already very much doing online training to a
Yeah.
very, very high standard as well.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
the quality of the online training is
Yeah.
superb.
Right. So you don't lose out on that front.
No.
And you can record it.
Uh-huh.
It's recorded,
Yeah.
so you can go back and play it back,
Yeah.
which
The contract that I just mentioned earlier at the start, and that is all being trained out
Yeah.
virtually, and it's just a fantastic
Yeah.
model. So
Yeah.
it's so you can do the whole training. So you know you're not having to go into an office.
Right.
You know, 9 to 5. Sometimes you know people have to commit to that maybe for the
Yeah.
first sort of few weeks of their working life, but. That is all virtually, so you're not actually even having to leave your home to do the training.
Right.
It is amazing. It's absolutely amazing what can happen now.
And can I just
It's
add, the
always
funny thing is we're
business as
actually training some of our site staff members
Yeah, that's
sitting at their own desks anyway rather than in a
Yes.
group
that's what
Right,
happens. That's
right,
what happens.
right.
It's-
So
yeah.
yes, to make it more
Yeah.
efficient and
Yeah.
you know more personal to the employee. So
Uh-huh.
we can have banks, 300 people on site, but we might have 10
Yeah.
people dotted throughout the centre actually sitting doing
Doing
an
training.
e-learning
Uh-huh.
programme and
Right.
It's quite
accreditation.
amazing. You find that it's
Yes.
homeworking comes in. It's other processes within like the sort of office side of the
Yes.
organisation.
Yes.
All get re-engineered
Yes.
to reflect it.
I think that's one of the points that Hazel, the Chief Executive of Signpost, makes in the video that we'll show just at the end, that it affects other processes.
Yeah.
I'm conscious of time marching on, and I just wanted to make sure that we cover people's questions. We've got something here. Yeah, I've got it. My screen just jumped up there and threw me completely, but I'm back online again. Are home workers required to disclose, for example, to the council or mortgage providers that a room is being used for work purposes?
I can probably take that since I've got an insurance background. They're not really, you don't really need to advise mortgage providers. However, it's advisable for them to advise insurance providers that the sort of the use in the house is changing to work use, but the premiums won't, like your insurance premium will not change because it's clerical work that you're doing, so there's no risk, you know, to the building or to the contents of the building. So that's the only thing that you'd be advised to do.
Be careful about. We've also got a question from Bill, which we will cover in a minute or two, Bill, so we're not going to ignore you. But from Simon, the panellists have mentioned back office work and legal workers, suggesting that the opportunities are not confined to pure customer care. Does this mean that there are opportunities for higher earning roles? And interestingly, what level of earnings can we aspire to?
Well, absolutely. You know, the huge growth area is for people who provide consultancy services. You know, there are people working from home now who make a lifestyle choice, decision to be in a place with clean air and all the other things that you get from being in a nice spot in the Highlands and Islands. And, you know, these are big earners. You know, they're specialists in their own field. They're typically working with clients all over the world. Seldom on their doorstep. And yes, the answer is there are opportunities like that. You know, they don't tend to come in large numbers. These kind of opportunities tend to be in individual numbers, but employers who understand how they can access good people wherever they are, they just do it. You know, there's people in the. I know there's somebody working for the World Bank in the Western Isles, for example, and there's examples like that all over the place. I think if you go to any village in the Highlands and Islands now, you will probably find someone in there who's working for someone else, working from home. You know, that's the reality. But you don't see it. I think that's one of the big things. It always works against home working, you know, in terms of economics, you know, that people don't understand that somebody is working from home and probably earning a good salary, so it never gets in the statistics.
Sure. So it tends to be the higher volume.
Yeah, the higher volume gets the most exposure, but there's a phenomenal number of people now working from home who do it because they can.
Excellent. Good.
Can I just add to that as well? Working for a large organisation, some of the colleagues that I interface with, we have HR business partners for the UK, we have business development directors, planning architects, programme and project managers, all working remotely, permanently, because, you know, if you have to have a webinar or a conference, it doesn't matter where you are, really. But organisations are so spread throughout the country anyway, so there are a number of roles, but as Donnie said, they're not in high volume.
Don't need to be limitations.
I work remotely, so.
So
I'm a home worker.
Excellent. Good. Very conscious of time marching on here, and we did want to just let you see a little more from Signpost, the organisation that we heard from earlier in the webcast. This time we're going to cut to the Chief Executive, Hazel Allen, saying a little bit more about their experience and where they plan to go next with home working on the back of that experience.
Yeah, I think in order to get the maximum benefits for the investment working and home working for Yvonne, actually what we plan to do is to roll it out to other employees as far as possible, because they do perceive it as a benefit. One of the things that we'll have to do to enable that to happen is to look at each job role and decide with the employee what parts of that job can readily be done from home and what parts of that job actually require them to be in the office for whatever reason. And office-facing work will tend to be those that involve clients. When do they actually have to be here to meet with their clients? Because our client base will tend to be people who are in Inverness and near, and who actually want a physical presence. They want face-to-face. They don't actually want to pick up a phone as the first point of contact. So that's the thing I think that's going to decide very strongly how much home working every person can do. Yes, absolutely. I think, as I said, it's enabled us to keep a very valued employee. It's actually going through the process of home working has helped us become more effective as an organisation. So the questions of technology and so on apply equally to home workers as they do to our offices in Nairn. You know, we hadn't got the right technology for Nairn. Well, as a side benefit to going through home working, we're sorting that out. So it's making us think about running the organisation much more effectively at the same time as going through a home working process. And as I said, the employees are happier with it. They see the benefits for it, they're more motivated. And to me, all of these benefits mean that home working is so far been a very successful exercise.
Okay, so you can see from that clip that Hazel certainly hasn't been put off home working, quite the opposite. She sees it as a real benefit to the business, and it's one of the topics that's come up during a live discussion, is the fact that it makes you look at other parts of the business, not just the home working element. I want to come back to one of the questions here from Bill, who was talking about employment agencies and potential part-time employees or contract workers, because there's an important element of what Highlands and Islands Enterprise are doing just now that may partially address that, and it's around this skills register which I have launched recently. And just to finish off, Donnie, would you like to say a few words about the skills register and what that's all about?
Yes, this is available now directly from the HIE website, and it's a great benefit to everyone engaged in this process, in the sense that if you're an employer, the first thing you're probably thinking is, where would I find the people, you know? And we can then actually send out through a newsletter an opportunity, and people then just contact that employer directly. So we're not involved in the process, you know, we're not doing any form of selection or anything like that. You basically put your details on there. There's no criteria that says, you know, you can't, or, you know, it's basically open to everyone.
Right.
Register your details on there. You will then get sent out a newsletter where the opportunities that employers are coming forward with are presenting to us. And as I say, you then just get in touch with that company, or go onto that company's website, as in the case of one that had been mentioned earlier, where you just go on to that company's website, the link will be there, and you just start the application process, and it's quite literally as simple as that.
Right.
So, you know, we developed a skills register in the Western Isles a number of years ago. It was very, very successful. It was like a one-stop shop. So the home worker or the teleworker was able to find a focal point where they could put their details and say, put their hand up and say, I'm interested.
Yeah.
And equally for the employer, it was a place where you could go and get access to quite a lot of people fairly quickly.
Right.
And you know, it worked very well for us. We're expanding it now across the whole of the HIE area.
So if someone wants to get onto that register and start to, where do we go?
Just go to the HIE website, and you'll see the home working section on there, and there's a link, and it just takes you straight into the skills register, and you just put your details in.
So that's the usual www.hie.co.uk. That's right. Glad you finished the line off for me. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. I'd like to say thanks to Donnie and to Gillian and Kathleen as well. I hope that you found that interesting. I've actually discovered quite a bit that I didn't know before, so that's been useful. I'll be even better prepared for the next webcast that we have at 12:30 today, which is looking at home working from an employer's perspective. Please, if you do want to join that one as well, we'd love to see you back in again. And particularly if we didn't manage to get to your questions, because I know there were one or two that we ran out of time for. But again, from me, I'd like to say thanks very much for joining us, and hope to see you again soon.